Hello, BookTube. It's a very laid-back day here at Hyde Cottage. Just my sparrows and my two squirrels and my little bean, and a few books. We got a little bit of mail. I thought we'd go through that and see what might be of interest. No boxes, nothing big, but there might be something interesting. There has been the last few times. What is this first one? Okay, what is this? Okay, this comes out in mid-October, and it is, I think we might have seen this already. This is How High, That High by Diane Williams, a collection of short stories, very short stories. This thing is 128 pages, so factor in all the opening pages and the ending pages and the author's requisite 3-page acknowledgments. That's 100 pages for short stories, with a horrible title. It's a not that bad a U.S. cover, but the title is, it's a working title, if that. What have we got here? Diane Williams, a radically inventive master of the short story, is back with a mind-bending new collection that once again expands the possibilities of fiction. Because the possibilities of fiction were at one set of dimensions before she started doing this, and now they're at a different set of dimensions. They were at one set of dimensions for Jane Austen and Leo Tolstoy and John Cheever and Eudora Welty, but now, thankfully, they're at a larger set of dimensions. Williams's stories are taut close-ups, revealing entire lives in the span of 2 or 3 pages. Her images are daring, and her sentences are rigorously precise, demanding attention to every comma and pronoun, in descriptions as jarring as, and then we get an example. Her mouth was open. The tongue was curling up toward her upper row of teeth, and the nose was upturned as well. Her eyes were blue, white, black, and orange, and she was ably balancing the lyrical and the dramatic. I do remember this. We did see this book before, and I pointed out before that those sentences are really, really bad. They don't expand the possibilities of fiction. They're just bad prose. Her mouth was open. Okay, fine, flat declarative sentence. But the tongue was curling up towards her upper row of teeth, and the nose was upturned as well. That's up 3 times in one sentence. I'm sure that the author or the author's acolytes would say that that kind of thing was entirely intentional. I don't think so. And I don't know many people who can curl their tongue downward. But anyway, her eyes were blue, white, black, and orange, and she was ably balancing between the lyrical and the dramatic. Okay, if you're extending the possibilities of fiction by saying that someone had blue, white, black, and orange eyes, I suppose you could then you would be equally responsible for expanding the boundaries of fiction if you said that someone's eyes were rhododendrons in pots in the back patio. But these stories depict ordinary moments, a visit to the doctor's office or a married couple's 100th dance together. But within the quotidian, the author delivers a lifetime of insecurities, lusts, rejections, and revelations, making her work equally discomforting and amusing. Okay, well, this comes out in 3 weeks. It's going to take me about 30 minutes to read, and maybe I will do that tonight. I'm always up for the boundaries of fiction being expanded, so I noticed a lot of blurbs for this author. How High, That High already has blurbs from Kirkus, Publishers Weekly, Forward Reviews. Why do I know this author? Oh, right, okay. The Collected Stories of Diane Williams. We saw that on this channel. No one of which was more than 2 pages long. And that has blurbs from the New York Times, the New Republic, the London Review of Books. I don't think that anybody I know personally is implicated in these blurbs. We shall see. This isn't going to be an investment of time, so I'm not all that worried about it. Baby, 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 no slurping. Again with the slurping. Oh. Let's just move on. This wasn't a slim volume of poetry. It was a slim volume of prose instead. Let's just move on. I wish we had a thick volume of something, but there isn't one today. Oh, great. Fantastic. Okay, this is the finished copy. This comes out also in October, in early October. We saw this already. This is the finished copy of Shelf Life, Chronicles of a Cairo Bookseller by Nadia Wassef. And this is a memoir about her and her sister and their friend in Cairo trying to start a bookstore. Seems like a fairly simple thing. Bookstores get started in America all the time, but for 3 women to do it in Egypt was unusual. And they met with a lot. I read this in the time between when we got the advanced copy and when I've got this finished copy. I read it. It's a very strong recommend. It is a very, very good book. And they met with resistance right away, including resistance on very basic levels, where proprietors, male proprietors, would come in, would buy a book, then bring it back the next day or a day later and say they want their money back because they read it and it wasn't everything that they wanted. And the proprietors had to explain to these customers that this is not a library. You made a purchase, and unless the book is defective physically, you're stuck with it. And a lot of those early customers just doubled down and said, well, why isn't this a library? Well, what business have you got selling books? I smiled at that, of course. I smiled at a lot of points in this book because although a lot of it is groundbreaking and new, these women were extremely brave in their own bookish way. A lot of it will also be familiar to any of you who've ever worked in a bookstore. I had many customers come to me over the years and say, I want to return this book. And I'd say, what's wrong with it? And they'd say, I didn't like the way the plot turned out. And I worked for a long time at the big chain bookstore Barnes & Noble in Boston. And our managers, for a great many of those years, probably 20 of those years, our managers had a pretty nonchalant view of returns. The one thing that Deb and I had a few really good managers and who always articulated basically the same principle. They were getting it from their own personal experiences. They weren't raging a-hole androids that were manufactured out of a plant, the way managers at Barnes & Noble are now. They were individuals on their own, but they all came up with the same idea, which is it's not a question of that this is legitimate grounds for returning a book, and it's also not a question of us really wanting to keep this customer. They're not a customer, obviously. If they want their money back because they didn't enjoy a book, they're not really a customer. No, instead, it's that this job isn't worth the hassle. These are just books. This isn't heart surgery. I used to have a manager say that all the time. This isn't heart surgery. So if a customer wants to return a book and we can still sell it, we can put it back on the shelf and sell it again, then take it back. It doesn't matter what the reason is. It's only if they've damaged it, then the answer is absolutely no. Unless, even then, it seems like they're going to make a fuss all the way to Congress, in which case, yeah, just give them what they want and make sure that the head cashier who's making the transaction at the registers makes it clear to them. They have to be nice about it. They can't be rude. And make sure the head cashier knows that if this person never comes back to the store, it won't exactly break our hearts. And I heard some head cashiers, some very different kinds of people, make that statement in the course of returning a book because a customer had destroyed it. And I think the customer got the point in every single circumstance. I used to tell customers, a lot of times customers would think that they had to start a return by going to the information desk instead of the registers. So a lot of times I would be the person who would get that. The customer would come to me and say, I want to return this book. And I would automatically say, why? Because a lot of times there were things that I could help. There were ways that I could smooth things out. If, for instance, the book was defective, if page 120 repeated 8 times, something like that, I lost count of how many times customers told me I didn't like it. And I would tell them every time, even after I knew what the store manager's position was, I would still say, you do realize, right, we're talking to each other right now. We're two adult people talking to each other. I'm not some impersonal face of a store, and you're not impersonal to me as a customer. We're two individual people, adult people, talking to each other. You do realize what you're saying is ridiculous, right? We're not selling you these things on approval. You're taking your chances and buying something. You wouldn't, under any circumstances imaginable, return a record to a record store. Back, this was when there were records. Return a record to a record store and say, I just didn't like the sound. These songs didn't appeal to me the way this band's last record did. You would never in a million years do that, but here you are doing it. And you shouldn't. That's not a legitimate reason for returning a book. Some of them I managed to convince. I would say, I'm sorry, that's the price you pay. That's the gamble you take when you buy something instead of borrowing it from the library. And these proprietors encountered all that kind of resistance and all the usual sexism that you would imagine. And they persevered. Their bookstore, Diwan, persevered and eventually became a chain. And not just a chain of bookstores, but a chain of oases. That comes up over and over again. I realize it's a predictable metaphor for Egypt, but it comes up over and over again in the course of the book, where they realize that they are loving the store more and more because they have control. It's a part of their world where they have control, where the rest of their world could be very, very patriarchal, very, very condescending and sexist. But in their bookstore, no. And it isn't long before a lot of their female customers start to feel the exact same way and come to the nearest Diwan bookstore in order to not just browse the books, because a lot of these women didn't have much in the way of a household budget, but to soak up the atmosphere of a place where they weren't expected to be anything other than just themselves. I thought it was wonderful as a bookish book goes. I have a whole floor-to-ceiling bookcase for bookish books. This will go there definitely. I loved it. I hope that I will be writing about it in October. But I can strongly recommend it to you. This is coming out in just a little. Bean, you're slurping again, Frida. You're slurping again, baby. Is it the filming? Is it filming that somehow makes her want to slurp? I don't know. No, it isn't, because she slurps on her own as well. I strongly recommend Shelf Life. This is a terrific book about books. Some of you may remember, what was the name of that? There was a great book about books and running a bookshop. Was it Used and Rare? It was a couple that wrote a book. They wrote a few books on this. This reminded me of it all throughout, except I couldn't remember it. I'm sure you've read some books like that, books about people who start a bookstore or an antiquarian book service or something like that. I have many, many such bookstore memoirs on that bookcase, and this is going to go on there. I strongly recommend it. And now we'll go on to the last one here. It's a big cardboard envelope, but it is fairly heavy. It's probably a finished copy of something, which is great. Let's see what this is. Oh, okay. All right, yes it is. It's a finished copy. Oh, it's lovely. The finished copy is lovely. No paperwork in here of any kind, and none in the envelope. But we've seen this already. This is Alan Guelso's biography of Robert E. Lee, in the finished copy with deckled edges and these end papers that are rather nice for, I assume that is Arlington. And this is a biography of one of the worst traders in American history by a terrific writer. Alan Guelso's book, Gettysburg, pictured right there on the cover, is terrific. It really is worth your time. And so is this book. Because a new book by a terrific author is probably not to be missed. It's just, I mean, I read this a couple of times and I had fundamental issues with it. Robert E. Lee was a vicious slave owner and a traitor to the United States of America. And once you've said those two things, there isn't any circumstance, no viable circumstance in which you can then say, but that's where it has to stop. That's just where it has to stop. No Lee biography has ever failed to start the next sentence with but, and this one doesn't either. At least Guelso is aware enough to cite Lee's faults, although he downpedals Lee's slave ownership quite a bit. There's quite a bit of downpedaling here. Lee was vicious, as all slave owners were. Lee was hands-on vicious, as all slave owners were. People do the same thing about George Washington. They just don't want to think about Lee getting off Traveler, walking over to a group of cowering women and children and beating the face of the oldest woman, even if she's an old woman, with the pommel of his horsewhip. They don't want to think about that. But it did happen. They don't want to think about Lee standing there with an angry look on his face while his overseer brands a young man's face. They don't want to think about that. But it certainly did happen. And when we say brand the face of a runaway slave or whatever, you like to think about a neat little R, maybe right here where a rap star would have it. Actually, it was a huge R, or more likely the cattle brand of the household. Every household had an individual mark for their cattle and their horses. Ordinarily, it was something like that, so it was big. It was big enough so that you could see it in a lot. And usually, the overseer would slip or forget and brand right here, so that eye would be gone. And Lee watched that. He ordered it and watched it, and paid very close attention to how much money his sale of human beings was bringing him. So the portrait that Guelzo attempts in this book of patrician remove, of how Lee, yes, he was definitely implicated in this horrible, horrible system, but at least he wasn't an enthusiastic participant in it, is simply false. It's simply false. We have all the documents that we need to know that there were no examples like that in the South. There were no examples like that. Jefferson wasn't like that. Madison wasn't like that. Washington certainly wasn't like that, and Lee wasn't like that. And that is monstrous. There is no but after you've said that about somebody, and that would be bad enough. But Lee also took an oath. He also swore oaths of loyalty to the United States of America. And he didn't just go back on those oaths. He led armies against the United States of America, killed thousands and thousands and thousands of loyal, patriotic Americans. The fact that he looked elegant on horseback, I'm not sure that that's 100% historically attested to. There are plenty of eyewitnesses that said that he looked like, as one of them said, an upturned dumpling on horseback. There were certainly a lot of Confederate officers that looked better on horseback. But the fact that he was mild-mannered, that he was so-called godly, the fact that when he retired, he was an adorable college president, none of that means anything. None of that is the fodder for the but that follows those two sentences. It's the same way that other traitors in America have to be treated, and they're never treated that way. Lincoln or Nixon was a raving, bigoted paranoid, and he launched investigations and witch hunts against his political enemies, but he created the Endangered Species Act, and his realpolitik opened up some dialogue channels with China. No. He shattered the bond of faith between the people of America and their president. You can't ever get that back, and he shattered that. And there's no but after that. Same thing with Donald Trump, also one of the worst traitors in American history. You can talk about him wanting to end useless, endless American foreign wars. Okay. You can talk about him expediting what he called Project Warp Speed to get an effective virus, many of them, an effective vaccine, produced against a virus in record time, in time that the scientific community had not thought possible. You can talk about the roaring economy that he created by removing the brakes from Wall Street, by removing corporate regulations. That does tend to produce a boom. It also tends to produce a crash. Most Americans know somebody or are somebody who lost their entire life savings in 2008 because the previous Republican president had done that. You will get a boom before you get a bust if you do that, so you could look on that, I suppose, as a kind of positive. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. Donald Trump incited a violent insurrection to overthrow the government of the United States and install himself as an unelected dictator for life, and execute his vice president. That is first of all light years worse than anything that Nixon ever dreamed of doing. Can't believe that I would ever reach a point in my life where I would say that. I can't believe that. I went through Watergate, and I hated that man. Hated, still do. It never occurred to me, it never crossed my mind that it could get worse than that. That a president would do something worse than that. But it doesn't get any worse than what Donald Trump did. And even Lee didn't do that. Lee led armies in defense of my country. He led armies to defend the Confederacy because he wanted ultimately for the Confederacy to be left alone. He wanted ultimately for the South to be its own nation, free to brand the face of slaves until the end of time without any interference from the North. He didn't want to conquer the North. Even when he was approaching Gettysburg, he wanted to frighten the North, to bring in foreign adversaries on the part of the South, to dissuade foreign adversaries from the North, and to make the powers that be in the national election in the North sue for peace on separate but equal terms. He didn't want to do what Donald Trump wanted to do. He didn't want to overthrow the United States of America. He wanted the United States of America to be those people over there. He didn't want it to be destroyed and him to be ruler of what was left. No one's ever done anything worse than that. And so, when the Trump biographies come, and you know they will, you know they're not far away, the whole barrage of them are not far away, it is not possible to get to January 6th, the violent insurrection to overthrow the United States government, being urged on, not only in the moment, but while it was happening by the sitting president. There's no way to get to that and follow it with, but he did deregulate Wall Street. No. Some offenses wipe that out. And that is my main objection to any biography of Robert E. Lee that is not an outright condemnation. And this book is not. Guelzo tells us that we should learn from Lee, both the positive and the negative examples. Well, thankfully, most people in America don't need to learn any of the lessons that are the only lessons you will learn from the life of Robert E. Lee. Most people in America don't want to overthrow the government. Most people in America don't want to brand the face of other human beings. Most people in America don't want to do that. So we don't need to learn the lessons of Robert E. Lee. We don't need to learn anything from this person, this poisonous, viperous little toad. We don't need to learn anything from him. And the only reason that my reaction to this book is not an outright condemnation is because Guelzo's a major figure. He's a major writer. He is, believe it or not, even with a subject like this, he is very enjoyable to read page by page. I would recommend this book. Certainly it is better than any Lee biography that has preceded it in bringing the pendulum just a little bit towards morally normal. And in that regard, you know, I have nothing but respect, nothing but veneration for some of the great biographers that have written long, multi-volume biographies of Robert E. Lee in the past. Some of them have been great biographers, but there was always that element of veneration, and that can't be there. It just can't be there. At the peril of our national soul, it just can't be there. And it's there in this book, but to a lot less of an extent than anywhere else, than any other Lee biography that I've written. And that means that in that sense, I could recommend this book. I don't know if I'll keep this finished volume. It is rather nice. And I'm trying to remember now where I reviewed this. I reviewed this for somebody. And now I'm ashamed to say I don't remember where. I don't remember where it was. I think it was the Christian Science Monitor or the Boston Globe. I don't remember, but I know that I wrote about this, and I will check if I can find the link. It might not be up yet. This doesn't come out until October, so that piece might not have run yet. I will leave a link down below if I can find it. But anyway, those are your books for today. Sorry, that diatribe wore me out. We have Alan Guelzo's Robert E. Lee. This is going to be in all of your bookstores. This is going to be acquired by a lot of your libraries. And the reason why I'm giving it so much time is because this is a thorny issue. And it's not a thorny issue that we're done with. We're largely done with Nixon. Aside from Pat Buchanan and Roger Stone, there aren't any admirers of Nixon. But there are admirers of Donald Trump, the worst traitor in American history, the only one who wanted to overthrow the government and install himself as a dictator. Red lines don't get any redder than that. That doesn't get any worse than that. And we are going to have books that are going to be wrestling with that forever. None of them, I would argue, I would guess now, I predict, that none of them are going to take the normal, morally straight tone with Donald Trump, which is to say nothing that he did or ever will do matters other than what he did on January 6th. That's the only thing that matters. So that's the only thing this book's going to be about. I don't care what he did for foreign wars. I don't care what he did about massively increasing drone strikes and then blaming other people for drone striking. I don't care about any of the scandals. He incited violent insurrection to overthrow the government and install a new kind of America that most Americans, even the ones who were clamoring for it, wouldn't like to live in. No one in public life in America had ever dreamt of doing anything like that. So that has to be Donald Trump's biography, and it won't be. You know that it won't be. And the same thing is true here. This is as close as I think we will ever come to a moral reckoning with Robert E. Lee in a major mainstream biography. So in that sense, I can recommend it. You're going to see it in your bookstores. You're going to see it in your libraries, and you should. You should. It just, when you're reading it or if you're considering it, just remember it doesn't go far enough. Not nearly far enough. Guelzo was looking at slave-owning records for Robert E. Lee and then looking away from them. That's not what a biographer is supposed to do. Guelzo was looking at clear evidence or clear open spaces where that evidence should be, which is just as damning. That Lee was not only an attentive slave owner, but a brutal one. And he looked away from that. It didn't preserve the idea of Lee that he went into this book with. And that's not what a biographer is supposed to do. I know that's naive on my part. I know a lot of them do that. But you're supposed to go where the facts lead you. You're supposed to compose a person out of the facts you find. Not go in with a person and sift the facts accordingly. So, at the very least, a discussion starter. I don't know quite what I'm thinking having the finished copy here. Oh, God. Okay, well, this one has blurbs anyway. Blurbs from Andrew Roberts, blurb from Sidney Blumenthal, who's currently working on a multi-volume Life of Abraham Lincoln. Blurb by William C. Davis, and also a blurb by George Will. Please don't let the side down. Let's see what George Will has to say. Guelzo has written exactly what the nation urgently needs right now, an example of mature thinking about complex, flawed people who took different actions in contexts not of their own making or choosing. In today's blizzard of facile, overheated, and grandstanding judgments about the past, this unsentimental biography illustrates the intellectual responsibility that the present owes to the past. Okay, fairly non-committal. So you have Robert E. Lee. I think while I was reading, I'll have to check the tape, but I think while I was reading, Frida did her yoga for today. I might have missed it. So we have Guelzo's Robert E. Lee. This comes out soon. I think it might be out already. We have Shelf Life by Nadia Wassev about opening a bookstore in Cairo. And we have stories, How High, That High by Diane Williams. Tiny little thing. So that's our mail haul for today. Plus diatribes that have wiped me out. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.